Good evening, folks. 99 days. This charade is finally over. And with that, I welcome back our friend of the show, Mr. Barry Bloom. Barry, thanks for coming and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a good night to be on.
Oh, it's a great night to be on. Just a night of celebration and a night of relief. I'm not going to lie. My life depends on this game. And I was pretty confident we were going to have a season. But when there's even like the slightest possibility that you're not going to have a season at all, it's actually frightening. And I'm just relieved that this is all over and we can get to the business of the game. Uh, so full 162 game season, no games missed. We're gonna have Jackie Robinson Day. Do you think baseball averted disaster and will be able to avoid serious damage as a result of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as soon as the announcement came that the players had ratified, as striated as they might have been about this whole thing, and the deal was done, I think now you move forward and it's just another page, just to turn. That I've been through a number of them. 1981. 1985, 1990, 1994, 2002. We came down to the last minute, and Don Fear wanted to take them out, and the players came in and said, no, we're not going out, a week before the anniversary of first year anniversary of 9/11, and they stopped it. And then it's been pretty much 20 something years of labor peace coming up to this one. And I think that, and I've been saying this all along, you know, it, it really, if anything, it was just a labor dispute. People take it a lot more seriously and a lot more to heart because it's a sports league. It's baseball, but if it would be Caterpillar that you would have in the strike, the universe of the people it would affect are the people who are buying Caterpillars. If it's Ford that's out, then if a Ford is not available, then you go over and buy a Chevy. I mean, it's just a unique situation, particularly in sports. It's why Amazon can get all kinds of public money to build a plant, and nobody says beep about it in most cases. But if you're going to put money into a stadium or arena, it's a catastrophic event. They're both used as uh, you know big publicity things to boost platforms, and I think this was very much the same thing. But I thought it might go longer. I was originally said May 15th, and and what I didn't really count on was how much pressure that Manfred and the boys put on the Players Association to split up the Players Association and get the rank and file to basically say enough is enough. Let's go back to work. We've got enough gains here.
Well, it's interesting. There have been allegations that Scott Morris has been involved in this. I actually felt like the Players Association could have fought harder. I felt like they bent over backwards on their negotiation a couple weeks ago on February the 26th. They did get a couple of wins. They got the CBT hire, they got the minimum salary higher, and I think they definitely got a better deal than last time. But I actually feel like the Players Association wasn't strong enough. It was interesting that the players went against the league, not the league. I'm sorry, the executive committee. But the one of the stipulations of this deal was that they would have to drop their grievance over 2020, which I think the executive committee was not happy about. And of course, I think the players were just like, "Screw this, we want to play."
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll counter it to say that I think the Players Association got a hell of a deal out of this. When you consider they went into this whole thing, what they wanted was a landmark deal. They wanted to change the entire economic system and the competitive balance issue, and wasn't something they were going to be able to do in one negotiation. I think now what they've done is they've set themselves up for the future. And as you say, look, you're going from a you know a $210 million luxury tax threshold to 230 this year, and then it goes higher. They go from 575.5 as the minimum salary this year to 700, or last year to 700 this year, and at the end of the contract it's 780. That's a lot of money for those young players when you consider that 1,200 of the 1,900 players last year who got contracts all made under $1 million, and most of them close to the minimum. And people like to cast this as billionaires against millionaires, and it's just really not the case. A very small fraction of baseball players and millionaires. This is not the NBA, and and 100 and some odd, or 111, I think it is, are making over 10 million. So but they have baseball has control a lot of the media apparatus. They made sure that they took down a lot of the marketing and advertising for the players by stripping the website and the network. And so it was like, do it on your own, figure it out. But I think they've got a new pool for $50 million for prize money for young players who get Rookie of the Year awards. That's something out of whole cloth they never had before. Uh, you know, they've got the expanded playoffs, which they're going to be able to cash in on. That's more money for them, and into the postseason. Till they've got a draft lottery. For the first time in the sport, which will keep teams from tanking. Because if you go into a lottery, you can get the number 6 pick, as opposed to like really tanking for the number 1. It's a whole different thing. And so, and also as the luxury tax threshold gets higher, it just gives more room for teams to spend if they want to spend. Although I caution, and I've cautioned over and over again, and I did in an article today talking about the coming, resurgence of free agency and what this market's going to be like. The Dodgers spent $266 million last year and paid a $32.5 million tax. The threshold was 210. The Giants and the Braves were basically $100 million less. The Giants won the NL West. They came within like a pitch of winning the division, series, and then the Braves won the World Series. So I mean, to me, the how much money you spend in any sport, but particularly in baseball, I think what it does is it gives you depth. It gives you, like, when you have a $200 million payroll and your top line first baseman, who may be an all-star, goes down, your second line first baseman is not a double A player. That's what it really gives you. But the fact is that just because you're spending that kind of money, if you don't spend it the right way, it doesn't mean you're going to win. So I mean, to me, it's a canard. It's always been a canard, and it's an internal struggle between the owners that the players have had to adjudicate. And I go back, I remember Don Fear talking about this when the whole revenue sharing system was implemented, and Fear was totally against it. It was like, why are we doing this? That's a matter between you and the rest of the owners. It has nothing to do with us. But they coerced him, and then it finally became part of the CBA. But I mean, the internal apparatus of the owners, where the larger market clubs are subsidizing the smaller market clubs. The smaller market clubs are either not using that money to get any better, or when they are using that money to get better, it really, really pisses off the big market teams. Like the Yankees complained bitterly that they subsidized the Rays, and the Rays beat the crap out of them all the time. So this is all it's an internal fight among the owners, and the players are caught in the middle of it. All I'm hoping is that they got a deal. Manfred sounded fairly contrite today for him in the press conference.
Yes, he did.
I think that what they need to do is they need a deal. Hopefully, it's a 5-year deal that both sides are happy with, that they'll build upon for the future. That like not like the last 5-year deal where the owners took every opportunity. They built in all kinds of splits in the system, and they took full advantage of them. You can't do that. Essentially, these guys are your product and your partners, and you have to be able to work with them and keep them happy. And it doesn't really take that much. So I think the players, considering what they wanted, I think they got a pretty good deal out of it. And the owners are just fine. They're always going to be fine. Most of them are billionaires anyway.
Because Charles O. Fenley once said it was the first time that free agency came into the game in 1977. He called it a den of thieves. Anyway, what made
Finley should not have been talking about anything, but he's a crook.
I think he was crazier than George, to be honest. I mean, the 70s was an interesting
No,
time.
literally, he was a crook. No, it's like,
I didn't know that.
oh yeah, and he had no money, so everything was predicated out of how cheaply he could do, what he could do with that franchise. So anyway, yeah, that as we digress.
The crook too.
Yeah.
One's a liar, the other convicted. And it would have been actually interesting to see what would have been like if Billy Martin managed under Finley, because I think Finley left right after Martin took the job.
Right before, yeah.
So anyway, do you think we're going to have labor peace going forward, or do you think we're just delaying the inevitable for another 5 years, and that we see the same thing in the 26-27 offseason?
Well, I mean, that's just what I was talking about. I mean, essentially, they have to use these 5 years, to build some trust and a relationship, because it's obvious that the guys who are sitting on the executive council, those 8 players who have some of the biggest contracts in the game, 5 of them are Scott Burrow's clients, that they obviously don't have any trust. I don't think Tony Clark has too much trust. I think Bruce Meyer being brought in did a good job because they couldn't roll him, and they tried to demonize him, but they couldn't. And really, Manfred and Hallam and those guys are really smart. I mean, I know Manfred back for 20, 25 years. I was at MLB.com. I covered the labor every year, and every year I dealt with Manfred on a one-on-one basis. So I mean, he knows what he's doing. He's a cagey labor lawyer, a cagey, like labor lawyer for the owners. He's not a labor lawyer for the constituents or the workers, and he knows how to corner these guys. It was planned. What they did was completely planned out. No negotiations in November. Then deadline hits, lockout. No, really negotiations the rest of the December and most of January. And they were bringing it down to the point where how far can we push these guys? If we're not going to break the union, at least split them. And they came damn close to doing it. I mean, to your point, a lot of the things that they wanted, which free agency, they wanted to roll back a year or two in free agency. They wanted a bigger class for the Super Twos, if not going back to 2-year arbitration, which must be noted was something Veer gave back to Peter Uberoth to end the 3-day summer strike of 1985. And once you give things up, you don't get them back. They gave up on that. There were a lot of things that they went in there trying to press the owners on. And when the owners said, we're not giving on it, we're not giving on arbitration. And, it's like the 6-year free agency. Why? That was Marvin Miller. He put that in there. It's sacrosanct. And it's not. Miller did not put that in there. It was a negotiation at that time, too. And you talked about Finley. Finley wanted everybody to be a free agent because he wanted to flood the market. And Miller was smart enough to know that you couldn't do that. You had to have limited people on the market. But the fact that the 6 years came was just a point of negotiation. It wasn't something that was set in stone by Marvin Miller. So yeah, I think the owners were able to basically toe the line a little bit, but I can't be unimpressed by the deal that the players got. If in fact now they all you know wind up honoring it and work together. So to answer your question, it's an unknown because we have no idea what's going to happen over the next 5 years. And a lot of the animosity, yeah, sure, the players think they didn't get a good deal 5 years ago that the owners were able to exploit. But really, what happened in COVID 2 years ago is what generated all the animosity going into these negotiations. I mean, Manfred really cleaned their clock 2 years ago, and they just weren't going to allow it to happen again.
And I also think it was really brewing since the 17-18 offseason when I think there was possibly a collusion scandal, same thing we saw in the 80s going on. I think this really has been brewing for 4 years. And I think we can take a sigh. We all knew we dreaded this for 4 years. We've dreaded this since January of 2018. And I think we take a sigh of relief that we finally got it over and possibly we are past the worst of it. But we'll have to wait and see. But the game is back. Spring training will start next week. I believe games start a week from today, St. Patty's Day.
No, the players have to be in camp by
Sunday.
Sunday, and then the games start on the 18th.
Surprised they aren't going to start them on the 17th for St. Patty's Day. Got all the green hats and all the beer sales.
Well, remember they canceled the games through the 17th already, so I don't think they're going to bring any of them back. And I think their feeling is you need at least a week to get players on the field and to loosen the cobwebs and especially the pitchers. You got to get them ready to pitch. A week is not much time to get ready for spring training games.
All right, enough about the whole labor stuff. Now that the season is underway, how do you think the businesses around the stadiums, the restaurants, hotels are going to do with 2 weeks less of games?
Well, first of all, I think they're going to reestablish it. It's not going to be 2 weeks less. That one week of delay in the start of the season from March 31st to the 7th of April, you're going to have games here. And if you saw already, I mean, the Giants already canceled the Bay Bridge series in Oakland and San Francisco, or both teams did,
Yep.
and they said they're going to play them over in the Phoenix area again. So I think, in essence, spring training is going to start a couple of weeks late. They're going to have lost, like a week and a half of games. They're going to make up some of it. The only question comes is, the first week of April, they rely so much on families coming down during Easter breaks and spring breaks and that kind of stuff. And if you miss those windows and get into the 1st of April, there's a question of how many people are going to come. But I think they also, when it starts, like games start the last week of February, February 26th or so, the first week, the people aren't there either.
I
So,
think I think we can make it a week less going forward.
well, you can't because they've got so many stipulations going with each of these communities that built these ballparks, and those ballparks have to be filled for a certain amount of dates a year. That's why you wind up with so many split squad games during the spring, because they want all the stadiums active as many dates as they possibly can. I mean, you've got 10 stadiums here, and that were all built, not only rebuilt by public money, but rebuilt and refurbished by public money, in some cases with some help from teams now. But there's a huge investment into infrastructure here, so they're not going to be able to cut spring training back by a week.
No, it'll be interesting to see. I think how the restaurants down there after the final 2 weeks of 2020 were canceled due to COVID. 2021, of course, less people came because of COVID, and now this year you're gonna have about a week and a half to 2 weeks less of games. Do you think the restaurants and think they will do okay with just 3+ weeks of games?
Yeah, but you know what? I went out when I walked around downtown, Old Town Scottsdale. When spring training was canceled, and and I walked around, and there was a ton of people out there. There were a ton of people. I look. I did a lot of research on this, and Arizona is a state with $12 trillion worth of revenue. The spring training allegedly brings in a $644 million impact in a good full year. The last one they measured was 2019. Obviously, last year and the year last year they didn't even do it. So I think actually 2018 was the last one. 2020 was severely cut by COVID because they knocked off the schedule on the 12th of March. And last year, as you said, they were playing to 25% capacity. So there was a lot less people here, but period, because of COVID. But this year, it seems like there's a lot of people out here. There's a lot of people who bought packages to come in, and they didn't cancel just because there wasn't spring training games. Spring training games is one of the things you do here, but then you do a whole hell of a lot of other things.
And I think we'll see a lot of ballparks filled to capacity when this does get time late. Most of the fans are down, so I'm pretty optimistic on that front. But speaking of Old Town Scottsdale, I got to figure out what good restaurants are there now. Grotto's gone, Don and Charlie's is gone, the Pink Pony's gone. Are there any restaurants, newer restaurants, or restaurants that have been around that you think could take their place as spring training institutions that fans might want to check out?
Yeah, no, not yet. And I can't say, but one of the reasons why I can't say that there are is that we haven't been out in the community much in the last year since, I mean, Ton and Charlie's closed in April of 2019, right before COVID.
Yep.
And so, then we went into, started to go around in 2020. There's a Fleming's in Scottsdale. There's, a number of steak places that are very good. The Roaring Fork is very good. Fogo de Chao on Scottsdale Boulevard, if you like that kind of thing, is very good. There's a rotisserie chicken place in town.
Sounds appealing.
Yeah, which is a Houston's thing, Panera or something, and I talked to Don Carson the other day, and he said, surprisingly to me, because he's like 77 years old, that he's still out there looking for a new venue for a new Don and Charlie's. And so, he said he had a couple on the line already. They didn't work out, but he's still out there looking. And I said, well, really, is this what you really want to still do this? And he said, yeah, I really miss it. I really miss the people. And so who knows, maybe by next year we'll have another Don and Charlie's. So, I mean, that's something that's completely dead.
I think for the Grotto, I think that's dead. Gary's pretty happy in retirement.
The Grotto's done. Yeah.
I think Gary thought about it. I talked to Gary. He thought about it a little bit but then I remember in October of 2019, a few months after, he's like, "Hey, Steve, I got to be honest with you. I'm just having fun sitting on the couch eating potato chips."
Yeah.
So it sounds like the media will be allowed back in the clubhouses this season. Manfred said they would be going back to the pre-rules on that.
Right. That was good news.
That was really good news, and especially if I can get a credential this year, I would. I haven't seen the Giants' new clubhouse in Scottsdale yet, but what about broadcasters? Are they going to be traveling, or are we once again going to be doing telecasts from studios?
I think that's individually up to each franchise. I think they like the idea of kicking a lot of these guys off of the team flights,
Oh yeah,
and when you're used to traveling with the team, and then all of a sudden you have to make your own arrangements. It's not as glorious as it used to be. So I don't know how many. I know guys like Charlie Steiner, who's a good friend with the Dodgers. He's been doing games from his living room for like the last 2 years, and he loves it. He goes, if I never had to get back on the road, I wouldn't do it. And Jaime Jarrín, he's been doing the games from Dodger Stadium, and this is his last year. So I don't know whether he's going to. He's in his 80s. I don't know whether he wants to go back out on the road. I know got people like John Sterling and Susan Waldman do, and when Mike Farron was here, doing the Diamondback games, it was driving him crazy, but he's gone. So, I think it like I've seen with basketball and hockey, there are some franchises that are traveling and there are some that are not. And I think they've just found that it's an expense they can cut down on because nobody knows the difference if you're calling it off a TV monitor or you're sitting in a booth live. Now, as a reporter, I understand that there's no way that you cannot sit in a stadium and do a better job doing a game because the game is so nuanced, you can't do it off a screen. And so, and the tidbits that you pick up from being around at the ballpark that you can add to your story or your broadcast are fairly significant. But, the Giants, really create an interesting situation now where uh, Kruko wasn't going to travel anymore anyway. They had
Right.
set up a booth for him. Kuiper is sick. I don't know how much traveling he needs to do. Unfortunately, his wife just passed away, so I don't know whether they'd want to travel anymore either. My friend Ken Korak over at the A's, I think it's killing him not to travel. But like me, we're 70 years old, and it's like, how much of this do you need to do anymore? I mean, I was out. I spent a week. I traveled, drove over to Las Vegas for the NHL All Star Game and the Pro Bowl. Then I drove to LA and spent a week doing the Super Bowl, and I was quite happy that I was still able to keep up. But it's like how I did was on the road for a month for the baseball playoffs and World Series, and it's taxing. Fortunately for the job I do now, I don't have to write every night after a game or something because I don't think I'd be able to do that anymore. But I think Kirk would like to travel, uh, and Kuiper's brother would like to travel, and there's a different mix there anyway with Fossey gone.
Mm.
So yeah, I think that's going to be up to the teams.
Do you know how Dwayne is doing in terms of his illness?
I have not seen him. The last I saw him was at the at the division series. You know, and he looked good, and he just said it's just something he's going to have to live with and battle for the rest of his life.
Because he had the same one Fossey had, right? And
He had
Fossey,
what?
I think he had the same kind that Fossey had, and Fossey had it for 16 years before he passed.
I think plus he had prostate cancer. I'm not sure that's what Kuiper has.
I heard somewhere they had the same thing, but if as long as is it can is Kipe going to be able to still live a good quality of life 5 to 10 years, or is
Who knows what that, right? It's like having been a two-time colon cancer survivor myself. Now almost 13 years out. It affects everybody differently. Some people, their body is consumed by it, and
mm,
some people bounce, and they're just fine.
that what
Just when
that
they're just, I'm,
is I'm sorry, what
what were you going to say?
is that what Dwayne has, colon cancer?
Uh, no, I don't think he has colon cancer either.
So but do you think I think he's going to announce, I think he plans to announce this year though.
As far as I know, I haven't heard he's not. But he's had a rough last year, obviously.
I know, and losing his wife too. I mean, that's just a blow to anyone, and I just can't imagine the pain he's going through, especially since it was so sudden. As for me, my dad is going to be 68 next week, and he enjoys he goes to work, runs a law office, and he goes home and he enjoys just sitting on the recliner all day reading and doing puzzles and all the fun activities he enjoys. Me, I'm a young guy living in Sacramento. I got to get the hell out of here. I need to travel. I want to go see places. And I think, though, with broadcasting, because I want to be an announcer myself, I think I have spent the last 19 years announcing games off my TV set. But when you're announcing TV set, it's like, here's the pitch, ground ball to short. He will throw to first, and he will get him one out. When you're watching on TV, that's easy to do. But when you're announcing radio, in which you have to be incredibly descriptive, I feel like you have to be at the ballpark, because I'll announce, like, here's the pitch, slider whacked out into left center field, a base hit. Bellinger gets to it. Here comes Flores, and is he going to come in? Yes, he is going to come in, and he's going to score, and it's 1-0 Giants. So I really feel like if you're doing radio, you need to be there in person. And I think we'll probably see that. I know some of the radio guys were traveling with the team late last year, and I have a feeling we'll probably see a situation where the TV guys are staying home and the radio guys are traveling with the team. I just hope more guys do, because there are a lot of stories that broadcasters have of traveling on the road, and I just think, at least I hope the radio guys still do it. That's all I hope. So 12-team postseason. We're gonna have extra 3 days after the original scheduled end of the regular season. One of the two opening series will be made up October 3rd through the 5th, the other sporadically through doubleheaders, which is exactly how they made up in 1990. Do you think do you think a shortened spring training is going to affect the players in any way, shape, or form when the bell rings on April 7th?
Well, if you judge by what happened 2 years ago, where you had, 4 weeks of spring training, 4-month break, then you got everybody back together for a quick 3 weeks before you started a 60-game season. There were a tremendous amount of pitching injuries, especially a lot of injuries overall, a lot of soft tissue injuries, and you know, then the pitchers had to bounce back last year to a regular workload again, and you could see by the end of the season, most of them were toast, especially the veterans. Scherzer, Wainwright, Bueller. I mean, they were all Kershaw didn't even make it to the postseason. 2 years ago was great for him because he only had to pitch 50 innings. He had his best postseason. He actually pitched well in the World Series. But I think that was really attributable to the fact that he didn't pile up 100 to 150 innings on his arm during the regular season. So I think, yeah, I mean, look, baseball is rife with so many injuries anyway. The way pitchers crank it up, in terms of throwing max velocity uh, all the time, especially if you're a relief pitcher. Uh, I think there's going to be a lot of injuries. I don't think 4 weeks is enough time to get the pitching ready.
I would probably agree with that. But speaking of which, I think also it may have had an impact is the fact that we only had 2 extra September spots last year. Usually it's 40, which I think was way too much. But I also feel like it's got to be more than 20. I feel like it's got to be in that 30 to 33 range, because teams do need those reinforcements, because August and the dog days, you've been playing for several months. You've got bruises, sorenesses, you name it. And pitchers, especially guys in the bullpen, they're taxed, they're exhausted, and I really feel like that made a difference with the Giants last year. I think the real reason the Giants lost to the Dodgers more than anything is they were exhausted. It was the first year in which we had a full 162 with only 2 extra spots in September, and I just feel like it showed that we're going to need a few more spots in September, somewhere in that 30 to 33 range, because I do think that a lot
I
of
don't
these.
know that I agree with that. I think, the Giants pitching was pretty much just fine in that series. I think they just didn't hit a lick. The
Oh,
one they had a 1-0 win in LA, which put them up 2-1 in the series. And then in games, they got killed in game 4. And then game 5, they had multiple opportunities to win that game and couldn't win the game. You know,
well,
and, and then the Dodgers cooked themselves by pulling, you know, pulling the opener thing for absolutely no reason at all to try and mix up the Giants batting order, which I guess they did. And by the time you got around to what Kepler could do, you know, you already had Urias in the game, and he was pitching just fine. They could have left him in the game in game 5 and then gone to, you know, Trinan and Jansen to finish it off and had arrested Scherzer for game 1 against the Braves. But they screwed Scherzer totally up. So I mean, it's I you know I think Gosman obviously he was a little cooked, but Webb was pitching great down the end of the season, and DeScalfani didn't pitch well against the Dodgers all year, and Cueto was missing in action most of the year.
How
So
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, I mean, you haven't asked the question about the roster stuff now, but I think the Giants have a lot of work to do. The 107 wins last year, they
That's
pulled
not hap-
out of their butts, and
that's
so
not
yeah, it's not going to happen again this year. And they don't have Cueto, Gosman, they don't have Posey, they don't have Bryant. I mean, they just have a lot of work to do. I saw Bear said today they're going to be very active in the market. Well, and free agents don't like to sign in San Francisco for whatever reason. It's to me, if I were a free agent, I'd love to play in San Francisco, but because it's one of my favorite cities in the world. But
beautiful. It's a beautiful city. You read the crap that that on right wing websites. That stuff can be pretty influential to people, and a lot of ball players are the types that are going to read those sites and think that San Francisco is this homeless infested shithole in California that they want to avoid. I mean, that's just a simple truth.
well, but whatever it is, the Giants have some work to do, and so do the Dodgers, for that matter. I mean, I think it's a real interesting next up to me is what's MLB going to do about Bauer at this point? He was exonerated in the by the DA in LA. He's been basically on agreement leave since like last June. He hasn't pitched since the middle of last June. He was paid, but it's still he's been suspended really unofficially since then. And then it's like if they do say like they did with Osuna and said okay, time served, you're back. Then what do the Dodgers do? They owe him $31 million for the next 2 years. Do they eat that money because they don't want him pitching for that team and the players won't have him back? Or do they say, hey, we don't have Kershaw, we don't have Scherzer? Basically, our starting staff right now is like Bueller and Goslin, and the big depth that they had is essentially gone. May is coming back from Tommy John surgery, and who knows when he's going to be ready. But 12 months from Tommy John surgery is never enough. It's a recipe for more Tommy John surgery. So I mean, that big pitching staff they had is essentially gone, and they also lost their whole bullpen. Knebel's gone, Kelly's gone, Jansen's not re-signed right now. So both teams got a huge amount of work to do.
I
And
think
at
the
least,
are going to win that division. I really do. I just think bringing a veteran like Bob Melvin into that situation, a guy who's been,
with what pitching staff? They have no pitching staff either.
they still have a lot of hitting and a good manager in Bob Melvin. We've seen some teams without prize, and offense is the big thing in the game now. Hey, we'll have to place a bet on it. If I
Hey,
go to training,
the
bet
the best pitcher they've got is Musgrove. Darvish is
Clevenger
yeah,
back.
huh?
They should be getting Clevenger back, right?
Clemenger's another one is a year out from Tommy John surgery. And then and that's his second year already. So no, I wouldn't count on Clevenger. And they don't have Melanson anymore. He signed with Arizona, and they're always pretty adept at filling that closer role with somebody, and I'm sure they will. But their reason it wasn't offense last year; it was really pitching. They needed pitching at the trade deadline. They went out and got Frazier for some ungodly reason. They didn't fix the pitching, and then they fell apart. Plus, you have Tatis playing with that that exploding shoulder, which he didn't have surgery on.
which was insane. I mean, they
Yeah.
should have shut him down in April, and the fact that they let him play. I mean, because Tatis is really maybe the new face of baseball, and I'm scared after the Padres let him play all last year, hurt that you know his career could come to a grinding halt because of injuries, and I would be horrible for the game. This guy's is a great ambassador for the game. The guy loves playing.
Well, I think that Tatis has refused to do the surgery.
See, a lot of ball players are that way. Buster Posey was that way. Posey took so many shots to the head, and he refused to move to first base, which he should have done, and it would have extended his career. And you have a lot of these guys who are stubborn, and I feel like I feel like some teams lack the guts to kind of say, "Hey, man, no, you're not playing. We're not gonna risk you long term. We're not gonna risk you for the long term just so you can play this one season." And I
Well,
that ended
Bochy
his
had
career.
had I had long talks with Bochy about this. He's a pretty good friend of mine going back to the '84 Padres, and he said that Posey as a first baseman, his value was as a catcher. He said that he's just a guy playing first base. He's not that good a hitter. He's not a very good first baseman. And if he couldn't catch, it would be hard to keep him in the lineup.
Bruce Bochy, man, is he still managing Team France for the WBC?
You know what? He was going last I talked to him, which was not that long ago. He and Wotus were supposed to go over to France to manage their national team, and then the Omicron hit, and they decided not to go. With Bochy's heart ailments, and what they're like because they were well documented while he was in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And his father died at 65 of a heart attack. I think he's very cautious about protecting himself. But I did hear he was in minor league camp here already. So
It's good to see. And I know Wotus will be a roving instructor. So we were talking about free agents. Let the chaos begin because Freddie Freeman is a free agent. Carlos Correa is a free agent. Chris Bryant's a free agent. Anthony Rizzo, Suzuki, the young outfielder from Japan. I mean, this is going to be an epic week of free agent signings.
yeah, Trevor Story, Kershaw, Jansen. I mean,
Cutchin,
I did a story on that today. As a sidebar to the conclusion of the lockout, and it's the top 15 are pretty damn good. There's like 175 free agents out there.
do you think they can get most of them signed and be not just signed, but have them be ready to go on April 7th?
Well, I mean, they'll have them signed. The main guys are going to sign, and they're going to sign fast. By the weekend, I think that the top 4 or 5 will be off the market. There's also not that much pitching left, frontline starting pitching left. All of that was pretty much scooped up in the almost $2 billion that was spent, before the lockout. So, yeah, I think the longer it waits, the less guys are going to get. Then you're going to wind up with teams who are going to wait to see what they have in their rosters, who's hurt and who's healthy, before they patchwork and find and sign other people. And then you get into to close to the start of the season, and guys are just not going to be ready. So I think really, the top 15 and Suzuki are probably all going to go pretty quickly. But what happens with the rest of them? Like I just was over at the players' camp today out in Far Mesa, and I was talking to Souza about it. Souza's just a guy who is looking for a job, and he's one of those guys who he's going to hang around until maybe he signs a minor league contract like he's been doing, and then when somebody gets hurt, they bring him to the major leagues. So I think there's going to be a lot of that. There's going to be a lot of like the Diamondbacks signing Adam Jones late in spring training, like they did a couple of years ago. When they had a need for an outfielder. So we'll see. I think there'll be a huge frenzy. There's going to be some trades. I think the Mets are going to pick up some people. Like I said, I think the Dodgers and Giants are are going to be out in the market because the Dodgers, I mean, Guggenheim, they don't care what they spend. If they have to pay the tax, they have to pay the tax. It's part of doing business. And I think it's the same thing with Steve Cohen in New York. And I think the Yankees are a hell of a lot more cautious.
Yeah,
You
the
know, the
Yankees really become a lot more cautious the last few years. What is that about?
I would say that the Steinbrenners don't. They have money, but they're not in the mega money that a lot of other teams are in now, and so they have to have some sort of financial plan for how they run the organization.
Well,
Plus, they have to sink a lot of money back into reacquiring the Yes Network. They had to borrow a lot of money, like $5 billion to do that. They have a big nut on Yankee Stadium. It's $75 million a year. They've in the last 2 years they have had very limited revenue for them. 2 years ago, no revenue. Last year, limited revenue. And so you're talking about you're paying money for that stuff out of reserves. And what they've done is, they've ducked up and down over on the salary the threshold where they'll go over it for a couple of years, pay the tax. Then when they're tired of paying the tax, they'll duck under it for a year. It's but now it's different because it's not the Wilpons that own the Mets anymore. It's Steve Cohen, who's worth $12 billion, and Steve Cohen is going to spend money willy nilly, so the Yankees are going to have to keep up with him. And I don't think the Yankees, as good a farm system as they have, they don't have somebody. They don't have a shortstop. They're not. I don't think they're going to re-sign Rizzo. He's another one who's out there. um, who's in the top 15 free agents. They're going to trade Voigt. I think they don't have. They need outfielders. I mean, the Yankees they need pitching. They always need pitching. So I mean, the Yankees need a need a lot of things. Going into the season, and they've already got 214 million or something committed. So I mean, if the threshold's 230 this year, they're butted up right against it already. And the
And
Mets and Dodgers are over it.
that's what's weird because I mean, George was like the founder of these mega contracts, and all of a sudden his kids are not doing things that way. Another guy who I think is going to be very cautious is Larry Bear. Larry Bear has always had a reputation for being cheap. He has given out under his watch, the Giants have given out some mega contracts before, but I imagine someone like him is going to try and stay under uh, the luxury tax
But
threshold.
remember, Larry's just the CEO. He's not even a sweat equity partner in that group. The
Great
Giants have
confidence now, the guy.
Giants have 20 owners. They're the guy who's the CEO, whether it was McGowan or him, were answerable to those people, and so they can't just magnanimously make moves like Steinbrenner or Cohen or Mark Walter and those guys down in LA can't, or even my buddy down in San Diego is far overspent. What the franchise value is, and has nothing to show for it. So I mean, you have all these guys who try to work within their systems, and like I said, $100 million less for the Giants and Braves last year, and they wound up, and let's not talk about the Rays with a $75 million payroll.
And the Rays have had 10 winning seasons in the last 14 years, which is tied for fourth most in all of baseball with the Red Sox. The only teams that have had more in that span are the Cardinals, the Dodgers, and the Yankees.
Yeah, I mean they found a system that works. They're constantly, especially pitching wise, they pull a lot of good young pitchers, and when they're ready to get rid of one of them, there's always a couple more coming up out of the minors. And the same thing with their their position players, and then they fill in very well. You know, yeah, they. I'm surprised that more teams haven't taken people out of their system. Like Bloom and those guys who, the guy in Houston is from their system. It's like get somebody out of their system who's an assistant GM and tell them to copy what they did in Tampa and do it for us.
No, how do we'll talk. Let's talk about the individual divisions. We're on the American League East. Obviously, the Rays are the toast of that division and won't be for a while now. Do you think the Blue Jays could challenge them for that this year?
Yeah, I think the Blue Jays, really, when you consider last year, they played in Dunedin, they played in Buffalo. They didn't get out of the country and off the road until the middle of July after the All-Star break and back into Toronto, and they still won 91 games. If they had had a normal season playing in Toronto, they probably would have won the division last year. So you look at their lineup is just stocked. And now they've signed Cosman, so they've got their pitching staff was strong anyway. They've got a really good pitching staff. They've got a good bullpen, and the guy who manages them is very good too. I think he's out of the Rays system too. So I
Charlie,
mean, yeah. So it's I think that'd be the team that I would watch. And the Red Sox had a much better year than anybody thought they were going to last year. And and the Yankees, it just depends on really what they can do. And I just don't. I'm not a big Boone fan either. I think he's a nice guy. I don't think he knows how to run a pitching staff, and basically he makes the same mistakes year in and year out. But Hal decided not only did he want to keep him, but he wanted to keep him for the long term. And we'll see if he gets any better.
yeah, Boston, I think, is probably around 500, maybe slightly sub 500. Yankees will probably, I think, somewhere be in the neighborhood of 85 to 90 wins. They always manage to get a winning record and contend. AL Central, I think, very well could be the worst division in baseball. I know that AJ Hinch would like to see be reunited with Carlos Correa there. Do you think Carlos Correa signing could put the Tigers over the edge in the American League Central?
They could, but I don't think he's going there. I mean, he's going to want. He's going to want. What didn't he in the offseason during the during the lockout? Didn't he go over to Scott as his agent?
Yes, he did. That's right.
So Scott's going to sign him for the biggest contract wherever he's going to go, and it's not going to be. Even though the Illiches have plenty of money, I don't know that he's going to wind up with the Tigers. I don't think he's going to wind up back in Houston. So I mean, you got to look at the universe. Maybe the Cubs. Certainly, I think the Yankees are going to make a run at him no matter what they say. And but yeah, I mean that division with Cleveland, Kansas City, Tigers, Minnesota. Yeah, bleh.
I think Minnesota's probably peaked. I mean, what I'm interested to see this year is the Tony La Russa experiment year two, and the players kind of said, "Oh no, Tony's fine," but and I love Tony. Tony, I think, is one of the greatest strategic managers in the history of the game. And I would argue possibly that he and Billy Martin were the two greatest, but Tony ain't the same guy he was, and it's obvious his players had problems with him. I think he was just away from the game too long. I just don't see that working out again this year. I just feel like the White Sox are going to take a real dive and probably let La Russa go.
Well, I don't know. I mean, yeah, arguing the other side of it, Larissa came in there. He'd been out of the game for a while managing. He didn't know really anybody on the roster when he came in. It's a highly Hispanic and Cuban roster. So basically, and Tony speaks Spanish and he relates very well with those kind of people. I think now you come in, it's a year later. He's had a year back into more modern baseball. He knows his personnel a hell of a lot better going into this year. They're a pretty entertaining team. You know, I could look at it the other way that in that division where you're playing right now, Tigers, Indians, Kansas City, and Minnesota 18 times a year, you could really mop up in that division, which is what they did last year. And that this is going to be the last year of that too, because in the new schedule, you're going to a more balanced schedule, and you're going to be playing every team in the league at least once from here on forward, including all the teams in the other league. So, this is one more year for them to be able to mop up, and I think they probably have a good opportunity to mop up. I would pick the White Sox in that division.
If they're returning to the balanced schedule, which they used through the 2000 season, and no one they went to the unbalanced schedule. I personally, I like having 3 at home, 3 on the road, 3 series that is against your divisional opponents. I am interested to see how they were going to play. Every team is played. I already figured out how they're going to do it. You -8 series from your divisional opponents. You -2 series. You think about it. If it's West versus West, Central versus Central, East versus East, you have 2 series against 3 of the teams in the division. So you take the second series away from 2 of those teams. That plus the 8 would equal 10 you would need for the rest of the interleague teams. Um, American League West, Houston. What do you think of Seattle? Do you think Seattle has what it takes to finally get into the postseason this year?
I mean, Seattle is coming on. Dipoto. Basically, we were talking about this. A group of us baseball guys went out to lunch the other day. We were talking about them. Dipoto is a guy who just like brings people up and down. If somebody isn't hitting, bring somebody up and try somebody else. He did that last year. Uh, I think Houston. You're taking if Korea leaves now. Essentially, you've lost Springer, you've lost Korea. You've lost most of your pitching staff. We'll see what Verlander has, coming back from Tommy John surgery. Although knowing him, I'm sure he works hard and he'll be very good and he'll be like Smoltz coming back from it. He'll have another 4 or 5 good years. And he told me once he thought he was going to win 300 games and he's going to get close. I don't know if he will get all the way there, but he will get as close as he possibly can. So, they have holes, but Dusty's done a great job with them. We'll see what happens. The A's, we have no idea what they're even going to do in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
I
What kind
assume
of
big
whatever
fire we always see with them every few years.
you would think, but I don't know. I haven't seen the text of the new agreement, but my understanding is that the A's are back to having revenue sharing again,
Yep.
which was phased out in the last agreement. So that's going to help them. Plus, they're on the brink of perhaps getting the stadium deal done, in Oakland. And I'm not sure that it's the greatest thing in the world to divest yourself of the entire team if that's what you're trying to do. So it'll be interesting. I think Kotze will do a good job managing. I like Kotze. I'm glad he's getting the chance.
And speaking of old school baseball, guys, it's as I said, I love Tony, and I just really hope Tony succeeds in Chicago. And it hurt to see Tony having the problems he had, and it did. I hope and I hope that it's true. I hope that towards the end of last year, LaRussa had a better connection. Now, speaking of old school guys, Buck Showalter's back, and now he's only been out for 3 years, so I think he's going to have an easier time than Tony. But it just it makes me happy. I feel like that there is starting to be back more towards the old school, and I feel like having a World Series between Brian Snitker and Dusty Baker was kind of an indicator of that. And now Buck Showalter is back. Buck Showalter is definitely the type. I actually think the Mets may win the East this year, not because they're going to have a better team than Atlanta. I think Atlanta may have a better team, but Showalter is the type of guy who can really make a team play above their heads, and I really think he could do some big things with the Mets this year.
Yeah, I just think that the Showalter's real problem is that he tries to meddle in everything. He doesn't like the general manager dictating any terms to him. You're going to have an owner and a general manager and Billy Epler who he's going to have to deal with. So I wait for the explosion to happen and how long he's going to be able to put up with that because he's a micromanager to the nth degree. I mean, him and Dan Duquette at the end of their existence in Baltimore were barely talking to each other. So it's like, and the Diamondbacks even got rid of him years and years ago because they didn't think he was going to take him over the top because he was too involved in so many different things in the organization, like the cut of the grass or the astroturf, and what uniform wearing you're wearing, and you know if he centers in and if he's learned and centers in a little bit and just does his job, he's a really good manager. But he's never been to the World Series, and he's managed two teams that won the World Series the year after they got rid of him. So, we'll see. You know, I wonder what the how he's going to relate to guys like Lindor and Escobar, and it's it's tough for the older guys.
Well, I
But
remember. Oh, I'm sorry.
uh,
Back in the 90s when he was with Arizona, he had a reputation for being a disciplinarian. I remember reading an article from 2001 that Bob Brenly came in, and apparently, I don't know if this was meant to be a gag or if this was true or not, but Showalter had this like big stack of rules, and Brenly took the stack and dropped them and said, "Rule number one: go out there and have fun."
yeah, that's true.
Oh, that was a true story.
Yeah, that was a true story.
And I feel like he kind of eased up a bit when he was in Baltimore. He seemed to have a better relationship with his players.
Yeah, I'm not sure, how well Machado got along with him,
Well, it's hard
but
for him to get along with anyone.
right, and that's going to be a big deal for Melvin down in San Diego too. You
And Melvin
know,
was on the other side when Machado threw his bat at Josh Donaldson. But I feel like Melvin's got what it takes. He's been around a long time, another old school guy, and I just think he has what it takes to rein in a guy like Manny Machado.
well, there's no question that with the pygmies that AJ Preller has had managing the team the last 5 years, that they finally have a guy in Melvin who's a pro, and really Hosmer and Machado pretty well ran that clubhouse, and then they had Tatis by his nostrils. So I mean, essentially, it's like you got to take that back, and I think Bob will do that, and he'll have control of the clubhouse. You
And
know,
I
that's
think
that's the first thing they're going to do.
and that's why I think they could win the division. Managers can sometimes. I predicted that Kirk Gibson would take the Diamondbacks to a division title in 2011, not because they had some talent on that team, beat Justin Upton, Chris Young, but just because of he's a guy who you could just tell players like playing for him, and he's going to take them to a division title and have them play over their heads. And I just can't help but feel, even without a pitching staff, that Melvin will do the same thing in San Diego. I just feel like he's that type of manager who can do it. But what do you think about the National League West? Obviously, the Giants, the Dodgers, and the Padres are the big flies there. I don't think Arizona is going to have anywhere near as bad a year as they did last year. I think they'll probably lose like around 90 this year. Colorado obviously is going nowhere. But how do you think the National League West is going to turn out?
Well, I kind of wrote this last year going out into spring training and out of it, that the National League West is a two-tiered division. You've got the Padres, the Dodgers, and the Giants spending money, and you've got the Diamondbacks and Rockies not. And so, you're trying to build from the ground up, and really, I don't see. You may have a feeling that the Diamondbacks are going to be better than they were last year, but I don't see they haven't made any moves in the offseason except for signing Melanson. So it gives them a closer. But if you can't get to your closer, what's the big deal anyway?
Well, I
Talking
mean,
about
going to
they don't
contend.
have they have no starting rotation. They don't have a catcher really. They don't have a third baseman. They don't have a right fielder. They've got a lot of work to do before you even get going into the season too. And I feel bad because Torey Lovello is a really good manager and a really good guy, and it's just not an optimal situation for him. They should have let him go after last season and let him get another job, because I think he'll be great somewhere else. But in
I,
this situation, it's just an imperfect situation for the way he manages around. This you know a revolving door, players in, players out. He's a guy who needs everybody there to buy into his system. He works individually with guys. if they're not around, it doesn't work. So, the Dodgers and the Giants. What did the Giants win? 18 times or 17 times against against the Diamondbacks last year.
17, I believe.
Yeah, and the Dodgers killed them. So, but saying where we are here, you have the Dodgers and the Giants, as we were talking about before. They just need a lot of people to fill spots at this point. And I think the Dodgers probably have some farm people who we haven't seen, although the guys last year who replaced Kiki Hernandez and Jack Peterson didn't get the job done. You know, it you know, if they signed Freddie Freeman, now we're talking about something, and move Max Muncy to second base. And then you have Trey Turner, and the Turner's on the right side. You've got, AJ Pollock and Mookie and, and Bellinger in the outfield. That's a hell of a team. And they'll pick up some pitching. So, and they may bring Bauer back under those circumstances if he's allowed to.
Bring him back. So Gabe Kapler, now it's obvious that Dave Roberts is not really in charge at all in October. The comment about prior to Game 5 that everyone gets a vote and the decision comes from the very tippy top. Those are the words he used.
Right.
Does Farhan have a similar influence in in-game managing like Friedman does in LA, or is he allow Kapler to manage more on his own?
According to Kapler, because I talked to him a lot about this last year, and he was one of the only managers that we actually had pre-games with, where we could sit in the dugout as a group with him and shoot the shit. And after he was done, you could pull him aside, and talk some more. Most everything was still done by Zoom last year. I'm guessing that's not going to be the case anymore. But in asking him, he said not as much, input from the front office as you might think.
I got that sense.
And I think that I look, I didn't think Kapler was much of a manager, and essentially results speak for themselves. I mean, he got more out of that team with more crazy moves last year than anybody I've ever seen. And sure, I voted for him as manager of the year, and I was going to vote for him as manager of the year from August on. And Roberts was right up there, because even though Roberts doesn't have much control of the in-game calls, he does have to sell it to his players. He does have to sell it to the media, and his players love him. He's a great guy dealing with the players. So, I mean, that's his strength. And I think Gabe was like that last year with the players. I think they trusted him. Certainly deferring to Posey much of the year was really smart. He recognized very quickly, because he didn't have him in his first year, but he realized very quickly that a healthy Posey, controlling the pitching staff and controlling the guys in the locker room, was very important. To me, it was much like the Yankees in the later years when the core four put it together and won the 2009 World Series, and how much influence Jeter and those guys had on the clubhouse. And I think that Kapler let Crawford and Posey and Belt bring his message to the clubhouse. You need those guys, those kind of guys, to do that. The guys who, they were your winners, whatever they have left, and they showed that they all had quite a bit left last year. You ride those guys, and everybody else follows. And so, I think he did a tremendous job with all of that. And my good friend John Shea, wrote an interesting piece now that he's got the designated hitter in the National League.
Yuck.
Well, but he does. So how is that going to change? The fact that you don't have the pitcher in there, You're not going to pinch it. You're not going to be flip flopping around the lineup anymore. You know, are you going to lefty righty the way he does? You know, with throughout a game, but you're not. But you're going to and you're going to do that with the DH. How much of that those moves that he made? I think that's up to question at this point because every year is different, and every clubhouse is different, and every team is different, and this one is without Posey around is really going to be different. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, it could be a real reversion to the mean there with the Giants this year.
I would like to see Cueto come back just because he's such a good clubhouse guy and just a really smart guy. One of the smartest guys I've ever seen play the game. Just an intelligent human being. And just a guy I have the. And I was actually hoping that he would start game 4 over Discofani because I felt like he could have had a chance, kind of, because he's the kind of guy. Yes, he's past his prime, he's clearly in his twilight, but it's like Edgar Renteria. When the bright lights come on, that's where he's at his finest. And I feel like if he would have taken the ball in game 4, yes, he wouldn't have given you 7 or 8 innings, but I feel like he could have given you 4 or 5 solid innings and helped turn.
Well, I think there is you answer your own question. That's where Farhan has the influence when they sit down before the game and they decide who's going to start, at each position, where they're going to bat in the order. It's very analytically driven. He's a Billy Bean acolyte. It's like when Billy started Sonny Gray in Game 5 against the Tigers instead of Cologne. And Cologne had won 20 games for them. And Gray had come on very late in the season as a rookie. And it was a hell of a thing to put him up against Justin Verlander in a crucial game that you had to win to go on in the playoffs. And that all came from Billy. It all came from Billy when they started Liam Hendricks in, as an opener at Yankee Stadium in the wild card game. Melvin did not want that to happen. He had Friars. That's why they had Friars. He wanted to pitch Friars. There's no way Billy overruled him. And I think that's where Farhan says you're starting Discofani, you're not starting Cueto, and and Gabe goes along with it. But when it comes down to like latter game moves, they may map things out, but you still have to let your manager manage. There's just too many moving parts.
So speaking of Melvin, do you think that could explain why he left Oakland?
No, I think he just left Oakland because he'd come to the end of the line there. The Padres offered him a longer term contract, probably for a lot more money. You know, he took a look at that team. Sat down, probably talked to Preller, Seidler about the future of the organization. They've got Manny signed for another 7-8 years. I think he's got an opt out, but I'd be surprised if he opted out. You got Manny, you still have Hosmer for a while. You've got Tatis for 13 years. You've got the parts there for the long term. Those guys aren't going anywhere. They're just going to build around them. That's their whole philosophy down there, as opposed to here or in Oakland where everything is short term. So yeah, I think Bob probably had enough of it. And I don't think he sought the job. But when the Padres asked permission to talk to him, Billy said sure. And when Bob took the job, it was kind of like when Bochy left the Padres. He had one more year on his contract down there. And Sandy Alderson told him, "Oh, the Giants offered you a 3-year deal. Well, if I were you, I'd take it because I can't promise you that you'll manage here beyond this year." And so Bochy left, and the rest is history. The Padres haven't been to the playoffs except for that one, COVID year since.
Before we go to our final subject, we've been on here an hour, and again, thank you for your time. I just want to make one thing clear. I do not think the Diamondbacks are going to go anywhere near contending. I just don't think they're going to lose 110 games. But we were talking earlier about the game 5. I'll tell you what truly cost the Giants game 5 is they were just swinging for the fences at everything. Now they're banning the shifts, or they're not definitely, but it sounds like most likely they are in 2023. these shifts go back to Ted Williams. The four men on the right side of the infield, that's how they shifted with Ted Williams. And if I feel like if you want to beat the shift, learn to go the opposite way. We can't do that anymore. Now we're teaching guys to just swing for the fences on every single pitch. And it's just like you could easily beat the shift by going the other way. There got to be at least some guys in this league who can still go the other way.
But there was some discussion like that in the playoffs because if you watch the playoffs all the way through, there was a lot of hitting against the shift in the playoffs,
There
and
was this
people,
Braves, and
and there was discussions about that, about why if you can do it in the playoffs, why aren't you doing it during the regular season? And during the regular season, you're playing for your contract and to win, and in the playoffs, you're just playing to win. So you're going to do things, sacrifice things to win. But I think, to your point, there are more players who could do this than don't. But there are also a lot of players. I've seen, Mark Shishera, a number of players who, they position a guy, they know his tendencies, and he lines right to that guy, whether in short right field or right behind second base. I mean, I'm all for let's try it without the shifts and see what happens, and whether or not it brings back the balls in play. Because I think what it's led to is it's led to these three outcome approach to the game, where you're just trying to hit above the shift, and a single is kind of meaningless. So it's like, okay, if we shift to the right hand side and you're a left hand hitter and you single to left through the shortstop, we'll give you that single any time because you didn't hit a double. You know, but on the other hand, a walk is more valuable than a single. I don't understand that because a single is a single and a walk is a walk. And even though it may take you more pitches to get the walk, so you're using up more pitches, it's the same outcome. You're just going to first base. So, and the single is just as much a part of your on base percentage and your slugging percentage and your OPP too. So I don't understand how the game has devolved to this point. All I know is that Manfred said a number of years ago that
we want
when
more.
this came up, that we're going to monitor this and we're going to work on it and see if it works its way back. And it never worked its way back. It just got worse.
I
So if you
think
want more offense in the game, you've got to get rid of the shifts. It's really that simple.
because the offense started really in 2015, Manfred's first year. When Manfred took over that winter, he specifically said, "I want more offense. I want more home runs." Do you think like maybe he sent out a memo to the team saying, "Hey, we want to see more home runs," and that could explain this? Because I don't get why are our hitting coaches basically abandoning what has been taught for over a century, something that's been
I
so
think it was.
what,
I
20
actually think it was more, you know, um, akin to they put at the same time Manfred came in was when they started putting in all these tracking systems into the major league parks, and you started breaking down spin angle, spin, launch angles, all the things that are now part of the game that weren't part of the game in 10, 15 years ago. Those are all the result of putting that sport cat
yeah,
system into the ballparks and
that,
being able to and being able to monitor everything a player has done, and also being able to quantify how many steps a center fielder takes to get to a ball, whether you're an average center fielder or you're not. You can now measure it. You can measure, like I said, the spin rate. You can measure all these things. And so I think that using all that information, particularly launch angles, that's what really changed the game. It's all part of the analytic driven, way the game has gone.
but with analytics started off more with small ball, and a lot of teams started going to analytics in 2012 after the movie came out with Brad Pitt in it, and then in 2018, I feel like a lot of teams really went more with launch angles, and analytics starts off as this one thing where it's small ball, and now it's morphed into let's swing for the fences on everything. This is why I'm not, and I'm a big numbers guy. I love numbers, but this is why I've never been a fan of analytics. And
Well, they're there, and the as much as we might not like it, there has to be some way of being able to move the game back a little bit. And I think I'm a big proponent of getting rid of the shifts. And I'm a big proponent of, the designated hitter, universal designated hitter, because most pitchers don't hit anymore. The last time they hit, they were in high school, if they were a pitcher and a position player. If not, the last time was like they were in Little League. So, I mean, I just don't, for the amount of money you charge, I just don't think you're giving fans a really good product by sending a guy up to the plate who can't swing the bat. I can't even bunt in most cases anymore. And then the analytics tell you that the sacrifice bunt is worthless. So it's a product that's been moved out of the game too. And the whole NL way of approaching the game is gone.
yeah,
So, what's the point of it anymore? It's
but
the other thing is I haven't seen in the new agreement what the roster sizes are too.
I assume it's going to be the same, but since we haven't seen it, I don't think we
I
can assume.
remember, before COVID, they were going to limit 13 pitchers to the staff.
They didn't do that.
No, they didn't because of COVID. But now, since we're past COVID,
I wouldn't say
I think,
past COVID, but I know what you mean.
yeah, you know what I mean.
Still mask up and still get vaccinated, folks.
Right, right.
There's a reason why the 107 win Giants and 106 win Dodgers were sitting at home in the World Series, and the 88 win Braves won the World Series, because the Braves, in two strike situations throughout the postseason, would shorten their swings and get base hits and knock runs in. And I really am cautiously optimistic that last year's World Series between two teams with old school philosophies, Dusty and Brian Snitker, two teams that could take quality at bats, could shorten their swings in those two strike situations. I really feel like last year's World Series may set the game on the right track. But I have a better idea. Let's just make everyone robots. We're just taking the human element of the game, and now it's possible we may have a robotic strike zone in 2024. I have a real beef here. The umpires in this game have been so unfairly treated, and I mean just incredibly unfairly treated. And Joe Torre took away all of their power and took away all of their character. It's like it's all
Actually,
whatever.
actually, it was Alderson. It wasn't Turk.
No,
When Alderson broke the union back, really, back in the late '90s, early 2000s.
Phillips
That
involved. Phil, you saw more umpires acting in character in the 2000s, and some of the younger guys who came up in the 2000s would have some characters. There are still some characters who came up in that time period. Ron Kolpa is one, for example. Doug Eddings is a character. The guys who are coming up today aren't characters. It's all a uniform. Every time you hear a guy on the bench, it's no more, no more. You're gone. It's just like they're taught to be robotic, have the same stance, have the same set of mechanics, and we need those character umpires from the 70s and 80s back. And I thought Tom Hallion was supposed to retire. He said he was going to retire after crew chiefing the World Series, but apparently he's back this year, and I hope he's working. Could be one of those things where he just spends the year on the IL and gets the last year of his contract. But I like the old school umpires. I was watching a spring training game from 2009 with Bob Davidson behind the plate, who was definitely one of those characters, and he made this horrible check swing ball on Chris Duffy. It was March 7th, 2009. I mentioned the name because Dale Swaim's yelling at Bob, and Bob turns to the dugout and says, "Hey, Dale, it's March 7th. Who gives a shit?" I just feel like umpires should be allowed.
Look,
Don't make a habit of
you're
it.
preaching at the choir with this because when I first started, this is like I started in 1976. This is going to be like my 47th year covering baseball.
Yeah.
When back in those days, I knew all the umpires. You could walk into an umpire's room anytime you wanted to. If you had a question for an umpire, you knocked on the door. Hey, I'm looking for Fromming. Okay, Fromming would come out, and then you'd wind up getting the answer to the question that you needed. Now you can't go you can't go in there anymore. It's got to be a pull reporter. You can't build a relationship with an umpire. I used to drink in bars with the umpires.
See, and the
You know,
umpires should allow
Doug
people to
Harvey
play.
was such a good Doug Harvey was such a good friend of mine that when he was inducted to the Hall of Fame, I do these orientation tours with the inductees. I've done like 10 or 11 of them. Harvey asked for me and allowed nobody else on the tour.
Oh wow.
And it's like they were characters. They were great guys. I've got to go, but I'll finish it off with this story. With Bruce Frumming and Tommy Lasorda, it was like an afternoon game at Dodger Stadium, and Lasorda and Frumming had something going with each other. And if I remember correctly, Frumming threw him out of the game. So I go into Lasorda's office after the game, and he's like ripping the shit out of Frumming. So I walk down to like Frumming's office, and or to their their clubhouse, and I knock on the door, and I go, "Hey Bruce, hey Barry, what's going on?" So I said, "Hey, this is what Tommy said about you." He goes, "Well, F you, blah, blah, blah. You go back and tell Tommy." So I went back and told Tommy. And Tommy was like, "Yeah, well, Frumming's an idiot, blah, 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 blah. You go back and tell him." So I went back and told him. And this went back and forth for like 4 or 5 times. And I wrote the whole thing verbatim in the article. It was the greatest.
But I just feel like, because there were a lot of characters in both the National League and American League guys, but the National League guys, they'd get up in your face. They'd tell you how they feel. Bob was that way. Jerry Crawford, Charlie Williams was that way. Even Eddie Montague could get that way at times. And I just feel like they shouldn't make a habit of it. But I feel like at some
So,
point,
like I said,
player,
it was Alderson who broke the union. It was Alderson who
yeah,
put the umpires under one umbrella. Tory really didn't have much of anything to do with that.
but
It was
but
sort of
Torrey,
just set into place.
They didn't get disciplined. Like the umpires still acted like characters until
Well, because they're afraid, like everybody, especially now under Manfred, they're afraid of their own shadows, and they don't want to be quoted for something that's going to get them in trouble.
See, and I feel like umpires should actually go on social media and connect with the fans. I really feel like that could actually help their reputation. But I feel like, if a manager or a player, if you toss them out of a game and they're being an asshole, at some point you should be allowed to get up in their face and tell them to go fuck themselves. I'm serious. They should. That's baseball. And what they're doing to the game is a joke. Anyway, Barry, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a great day. We had a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, me too. So yeah, we'll do it again soon.
Hope to see. I may go to spring training. I'm not sure. Depends if I get a press credential, but I hope to see you around, man.
Okay, well, if you do, look me up.
All right. Take care.
All right, bye bye.